What's up, y'all?
Hey y'all.
Librarians. We got Lou, Ricky, Ryan. Yes, hands off the comrades.
Period. Hands off the comrades. It feels quiet in here. I don't know why. I'm like,
Well, it's usually me and you in there together, cackling. So
if I'm looking down, y'all, I got young Sankara here. My partner is in New York, so we'll see if she makes a cameo
if she
when she
decides
pops.
to exercise her self determination this episode,
Oh yeah. Oh jeez. I'm like, free the guys, but be cool, Sankara. Be cool, girlfriend. What's
be
going
cool.
on, y'all? What was you saying?
No, I was just saying, be cool.
Be cool. Where's that from? I wouldn't ever say bitch. Be cool. But remember that part from Pulp Fiction? Tell her, bitch, be cool. You never watched Pulp Fiction?
I've seen it, but it's not like I don't. It's not one of those ones for me that I like know the lines. So
I know. I mean, I like aspects of Pulp Fiction. I do not, I don't like the whole like rape scene. I thought it was ridiculous, and
mm,
I also think Quentin Tarantino is absolutely absurd. But
yes, that is also true.
yes. All right. We'll just wait a couple more minutes for more people to pull up. But how y'all? It's like summer. Most people are done with classes by now. How's it going? My birthday is on Wednesday. No, Thursday. I
Not
forget my.
not you not know which day.
I don't know what day of the week it is, but yes, my birthday is on Thursday, y'all. So yay, woohoo! I ain't
Happy
doing shit.
birthday.
Oh, he's a Zionist.
That's what
Well,
that Quentin Tarantino. That's what I was looking at.
another Taurus tragic. Gio, I will block you. I will block you because guess what? Lenin is a Taurus. Marx is a Taurus. Hubert Harrison is a Taurus. Malcolm X is a Taurus. Lorraine Hansberry. Yuri Kochiyama.
Ho Chi
Um,
Minh.
Ho Chi Minh. Sylvia Winter. Freud. For those of you who are into that. John Brown. So please,
Not you
save
running off your list of tours.
save it. I'm like, I could go on, but save it.
Oh
We have
man.
zero Taurus lander here. Zero. Angelo
Oh,
Herndon, Taurus. Anyway,
look
not
at you.
Jarvis.
You keep up with folks' birthdays too, because I wouldn't know. I don't be knowing
You
them.
know what? I'm not gonna lie. I put it in my calendar and just have it
Mm,
like yearly because I'm notoriously bad uh about that too. But all right, y'all, we're gonna get started because we have some people joining us today, as
yeah.
you saw with our post. So like we just want to start off with our updates and then hop into that interview and then circle back to comments and the rest of the show. So
Yes.
uh
So I will just kick it off in terms of life updates. Thank you, Jamila. I know, I had this was my was it my no, it wasn't my first tattoo, but it was my first tattoo that I would show people. My first
who was
one
your
was
first tattoo,
first of all, it was first of all, it was at this black owned tattoo shop that had recently opened not far from Central when I was in undergrad. I think no, was I in high school? I don't know because I feel like I wasn't quite of age. It's it's on the lower quadrant. Nobody sees it unless we're intimate, so there's no need to talk about it. So this is the first one that counts. I was 19 when I got it in DC. Oh god. Anywho, yeah, we're not gonna talk about that first one. So, in
We
terms of
have the
life,
same birthday, Goddess Crew, May 16th, me
oh,
and Janet
cool.
Jackson. Anyway, go ahead, Lola.
Um, so just a few things. So I am actually at home. I am in my what do you call it? My childhood home. This is our little dining room. I'm framed by Harriet Tubman. Paul Robeson is on the other side of the dining room table, and then the black nationalist leftist Last Supper is over here on the other side. But so I'm home. I came home for my mentor's son's graduation. She has been on the show before during the LDI iteration. of the show by Ina Muhammad. But I got to come home and see family and got to witness both of her sons who I've known since they were 4 and 5 years of age graduate from A&T. So that was great. This weekend was also Mother's Day, as you all know. As you all know, my mother is no longer with us. This was my sixth Mother's Day without her. And it's funny because Sharice and I sent each other messages at the same time about Mother's Day, but on different platforms. So I don't know. I think one of us texted and one of us sent an Instagram message. But I was just going to share the thing that Sharice shared with me, which I really appreciated, which is from the Black Liturgies book / page on Instagram. It says, on Mother's Day, I won't assume what today feels like for you, but because no person is fully hero, and because grief isn't linear, and because love is complicated, I will be careful with my words. May rest and tenderness and memory be near you this Mother's Day, which I really appreciated when you sent that to me. I know, all of my siblings have lost our mothers. My cousin recently lost her mother, and my friends are here also. I think this was her first Mother's Day without her mother. And I think it's her second Mother's Day as a mother. So that has been a big thing to think about. And then it wasn't too bad. Like, it wasn't particularly sad for me because I'm around family. And then my last update is.
Wait, can I just share that Layla sent me a gift that said, "Have a perfect Mother's Day," with a cat on it.
It was a cat carrying a kid. Listen, I was looking through them and I was like, because I don't want to send you the BS one with like the roses and the flowers. So I was like, what would be like this? And you love cats. So I was like, this is cute.
I do. I love them. Anyway, please proceed.
And so my last update is that African Liberation Day Nakba Day is going to be the one that we're putting on, AAPRPGC is putting on, will be taking place this weekend, the 18th and the 19th. Those of you who follow me on social media, you will have seen that I shared a new flyer today, but I wanted to. Oh, can you only do it? You can only share. That's interesting. I thought I could actually share the PDF, but I'll drop it in the chat for folks as a file or something. But I want to shout out Leah Boggs for hitting me up to volunteer to help out with African Liberation Day. And if anybody else is going to be in the area, please let me know. If you're willing to if you come out for sure. If you want to volunteer, definitely let me know. Yeah. And so that's it for my updates.
What I got, let's see. So, okay, this was my first Mother's Day. So, if you've been under a rock, I have a baby, St. Farah. She's down here next to me. She might make a cameo. We will see, but I'm gonna let her chill and rest for now. So it was cool. It was very chill. Oh, my partner got me these flowers here, which are very lovely. Very lovely, and a very beautiful card. He wrote me a poem. He is a poet, so he wrote me a poem. So that was nice. And then we went out to eat. I'm not gonna lie, I had a little bit of an attitude during the day because he was going and doing all sorts of shit. And I was just like, man, what the heck? Like, and then, he was like, hey, let's go out to eat. So I was like, okay. And we went out to eat. We had some good old food. Although we went to this restaurant, it was good, but they was out of it was a steak restaurant. They was out of every single steak by the time we got there because I guess they had a really busy lunch. And so they were out of all the filet mignons, all kinds of stuff. But anyway, I got the sea bass. I didn't get the sea bass. I tried to get the sea bass. It was out of the sea bass. So I got salmon. But they gave us a huge discount, which was great. We had some creme brulee. So it was a nice
I love creme brulee.
Day. Yeah, this was also my first Mother's Day after my grandma's passing. So, of course I called and checked in on my mom. She was gardening, but she was telling me when she was younger, she never she always wanted to learn to garden for my grandma, but my grandma would never show her. And she thought there might have been some shame. My grandma's from the South. She's from Tennessee. And so she was like, maybe there was some shame about, her Southern roots. But then she was like, but now that I think about it, I just think that was her personal time. She didn't want no kids all up in the garden when she was gardening. That was her piece. And so she was like, nah, kids gone in the house.
Like Jody's mama. Like Jody's mama.
I said, you know what, Mom? Layla's a crazy plant lady. She does indoor plants mostly, but if you have any questions about plants, ask her. Like, propagating and all that stuff. And so,
Yes.
So Mother's Day was nice. This past weekend, I was on a China and Black Liberation webinar. It also included Gerald Horn, Margaret Kimberly, Jifeng Liu. Who else? Some other people who are great, like the one who wrote like Africa Rise, China Roar. I think that's the name of the book. It was a good conversation. I did not stay for the Q&A. But it was a good conversation, some good information. I presented on Du Bois and the Black Chinese solidarity when he was indicted as an agent of a foreign power. I think that was on Thursday, was on Sundiata Chajua, has a show on, I don't know what it's called now, Black Power Media. I guess it's Black, I don't know. Anyway, on that other channel. And it was he asked some really good questions that hadn't been asked before. So if you know the show, Real Talk, with Sundiata Chajua, you should tap into that show. We talked about Organized Fight Win. We talked about Black Scare, Red Scare, and also my sort of origin story. Like, it's something that he does with all his guests. Like, how did you come to radicalism, et cetera, et cetera. I forgot to mention, though. I think I mentioned it the last time I was on his show in 2022 that I was a hotep. I started off as I came to consciousness as an Afrocentric. I watched A Great and Mighty Walk by John Henrik. I read, the Nile Valley Contribution to Civilization. I did my white purge. I went natural, all that. And so that's like how I got rid of all my white friends. I became the president of the Black student government. I founded co-founded an organization called Nzinga Sisterhood Circle. Anyway, I can tell that whole story. But anyway, so I always have a soft spot in my heart for like not the like ridiculous hoteps, but for like Afrocentrism, because I think it's really important. And a lot of people actually have that trajectory, and also a lot of people have gone through the trajectory where they were either they joined the nation or became Hebrew Israelites, one of those sort of Black religions as part of coming to consciousness. So yeah. Anyway, but yeah, that's all for my updates, and actually that's perfect timing. I think our guests are here. Let's see, so we can add. But let's sort of introduce this conversation, because y'all might be like, what are y'all talking about? Basically, as you all know, there has been so much repression on these college and university campuses around organizing for Palestine, around the encampments, around the demands for divestment, divestment, disclosure, and transparency. And so we have some folks who have been subjected to this repression, being suspended, being cast out, having their degrees withheld, et cetera. And so we want to have that conversation with these graduate students to get a range of commentary about the encampments, about their experience, about why they're doing this work, even though it obviously has come at a cost. So without further ado, let's bring up Momodou and Austin. Hey, y'all.
Hey, how's it going?
Peace. Thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. I'm on LDI for the first time.
This is not LDI. This is LSR.
LSR. Sorry, LSR for the first time.
It was our opportunity to return the favor, because we've both been on the Malcolm Effect. So
yes,
thank you. My sheroes. I appreciate it.
Let's just pop right in. Layla, you want to kick us off?
Yeah. So I wanted to start with a kind of open, basic question about your own understandings of the history of Palestinian struggles, and what makes you, what have made you decide to engage in any kind of activism or support Palestinian liberation struggles, in particularly over Zionism, right? In relationship to that question. But I wanted to hear from you all, what has brought you to this as student activists? I'll kick it to, we can go Momodou and then Austin, and then we'll go back and forth.
Thank you so much. Where do I begin? I think definitely when it comes to this iteration of activism was sprung into effect post October the 7th. I think in the immediacy after October the 7th, we quickly realized that there's going to be a backlash, particularly at our SJP. And we wanted to form a coalition, and we called a coalition the Coalition for Mutual Liberation. And in doing so, we kind of immediately realized, settler colonialism here is linked to what's happening in Israel as a settler colony. And we consistently kind of made the links between what's happening in the United States. And so many of the younger people were like, yeah, we became radicalized in the Black Spring in 2020. And we heard about Palestine for the first time in 2020. So in many ways, the stage was set for this instantiation of protests through the Black Spring in 2020. For my own personal journey, obviously being a Muslim, I had Palestine features quite heavily in my faith, being the third most holiest site in Islam. But more specifically, I guess as I became more conversant in my Pan-Africanism, you kept drawing the links. Why is it that Kwame Ture was one of the most staunchest anti-Zionists, for example? Why is it that Sekou Toure led the 3379 charge in the UN Resolution 3379 in declaring that Zionism is racism, for example? Why is it that all the heroes I love, from Malcolm to Baldwin, anyone I kept reading, always had an anti-Zionist stance and an anti-Zionist politic? So that was kind of and just kind of deepening actually, I know we're never going to speak on it more, but deepening my Pan-Africanism is what led me to be more anti-Zionist.
Thank you for that. Actually, I want to just mention this really quickly because I don't think we really properly introduced you all. So Momodou is a doctoral student at Cornell University, and Austin we actually you were part of our update last week, Austin, because we came together to see your master's thesis defense at MIT. And Prahlad, I believe you're also at MIT. So I just wanted to make sure you all know who folks are because we did not actually properly introduce you. But go ahead, Austin.
No, thanks. I appreciate that. And I think Momodou covered a lot of the stuff around Pan-Africanism and the importance of anti-Zionism and Palestinian liberation in Pan-Africanism. I think, from a personal, I guess I'll start with the personal perspective. For me, one of my best friends growing up is Palestinian. I grew up in a small city in Ohio, and we faced a lot of after 9/11, right? Faced a lot of the same racism, anti-Black racism, right? Anti-Arab racism, a lot of things, said or done to us, right? That really, for me, at a really young age, cemented that these struggles are connected, right? That white supremacy doesn't, it may relegate us to different aspects of oppression or exploitation, right? But it doesn't, in that way, it doesn't discriminate in terms of, you're below where you fall, right, in the hierarchy, right? And it's very clear about that. And I think when you look kind of at a world systems level, you can see kind of the way that, Africans are treated globally, and the way that Palestinians are treated, globally as well, and the way that they fall kind of into this part of the broader system. I think for me, in terms of activism, this really reinvigorated in 2021 with a lot of the protests that were happening around Sheikh Jarrah, that were also happening, around some of the stuff going on in Colombia, the country Colombia, and a lot of these things that after, as Momodou said, the kind of Black Spring or the George Floyd uprisings, right, that had preceded that the previous summer. Right. And so I think for me, that was really clear. And so in this iteration of these protests, as this has really been kicking off on campus here at MIT, and then also obviously nationwide and globally, it was, our Black Student Union and our Black Graduate Student Association here at MIT that were actually, the Black Grad Student Association was the first graduate organization to actually jump in and get involved in sort of the Coalition for Palestine, right? And since then, a bunch of other graduate organizations, and there are many undergrads involved as well. But it was really clear from us, for folks that have been studying and also just fighting and organizing in this kind of anti-colonial, with this anti-colonial ethic, with this understanding of, we're not just fighting sort of racism at a university from a DEI perspective, we're fighting, white supremacy as part of an imperialist system. Right. And in doing so, you cannot, it's impossible to ignore what's happening in Palestine. It's impossible to ignore Zionism, and the way that Zionism and white supremacy, are, part of the same thing, right? I think, just to, before I pass it to Prahlad, even in the way that we've seen some of the Zionist sort of counter protesters come about it, in the way that they sort of erect their flags or put up their kind of propaganda, is really reminiscent of the way that, segregationists and other folks put up the Confederate flags and the Confederate monuments only when, we are fighting for our justice, right? They didn't put that stuff up before, but as soon as you bring up equality and justice, all of a sudden there's pride. And as someone who grew up in sort of the Midwest and also in the South a little bit as well, this kind of heritage, not hate, really seems very similar to a lot of the things that I've witnessed, right, especially over the last 3 weeks, while we were doing the encampment, but even beforehand, with a lot of folks. So I think for me, it's really, a lot of folks talk about Black folks don't care about Palestine, or things like that, and I think that's actually patently false. But and I'm happy to talk more about that, as someone whose family is from for better or worse, this country. I think that there are really clear ties, for me as well, historically, and then obviously in this current moment too.
So Prahlad, do you want to briefly introduce yourself? And then the question was, how do you understand the history of the Palestinian struggle, and what makes you support Palestinian liberation efforts as opposed to Zionism?
Absolutely. First, thanks for having me on. I'm Prahlad. I'm a first-year graduate student at MIT, studying electrical engineering. Palestine has definitely been a very strong theme in my life, like recently, especially. But of course, since, as Austin said, since 2021, there's been significant organization around it. Just trying to raise consciousness. I was involved in some Sheikh Jarrah protests in Atlanta, where I went to school for undergrad. I was at Georgia Tech there, and there was definitely a Palestinian community. We had a lot of community members hurting during that time, and definitely like the sense of community that I felt with Palestinian comrades there was intense, and it was really important to kind of show me why I should care about Palestine and what exactly was going on in Palestine. I think usually people talk about peace in the Middle East in this like very weird sort of like abstract thing, as if it's like some kind of joke. And then you realize like the obstacle to peace in, the politically termed Middle East is actually has always been the United States and its support of these white supremacists, especially the Zionist regime in Israel. So I think, personally, my background, I'm Indian, and I have for a while been interested and intrigued by what's been going on in Kashmir. I didn't understand it when I was first sort of introduced to what was going on. I sort of always thought of India and Pakistan as like two opposing sides. I remember growing up, my parents used to make like jokes, like whenever somebody would make a bad joke, they would say "joke mara Pakistan," like it's a Pakistani joke, right? They'd say it in fun, but it was like that was kind of the entrenched idea, was like things that are bad come from there. And I didn't really understand why that was, because I had some Pakistani friends, and I didn't even really understand the difference between Indian and Pakistani until trying to engage. And the history of Kashmir is really storied. It's passed between various regimes like for over a millennium. But the important thing is that, of course, they've never really had a chance at self-determination, right? And I think that was my first brush with that idea of self-determination. I saw that echo again, when I learned about what's going on in Palestine. I see these echoes again when I learn about, for example, Pan-Africanism, learn about the idea of like, okay, well, there are a lot of resources in Africa that have never been allowed to stay within Africa, like especially in the Congo. There's resources that have constantly been overmined, exploited, taken away. That includes human resources, that includes minerals and natural resources, labor, of course. And we should always first and foremost recognize that Palestine is intertwined with labor. It's really important for us to recognize that the global struggles always have to do with laborers. Laborers are the ones who suffer under imperialism and colonialism. So I think that was basically kind of the background that I came into this with. I remember learning about Indian independence and the struggle that went on to get an independent India. And I think a lot of people forget that Gandhi was actually kind of very much for the indigenous struggle. He was very much pro even, for example, the Afghani indigenous folks. He was the one who brought them into the fold, and they were actually rejected by the Muslim League in India, for example. So I think people forget about like how powerful it is to be aligned with indigenous struggle and how important it is to ally yourself along that principle. And Palestine is, of course, like one of, I think, the strongest threads that we've seen, but it should be an echo throughout the world, especially here on Turtle Island.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Gandhi was also anti-Black.
Yes.
Right? So Gandhi believed in the freedom of colors and was like, keep them blacks where they at. But that, it's important to bring that up only because solidarity has to be forged. You can't assume that oppression leads automatically to solidarity. So in that vein, I want to ask a question about the encampments, right? They're a mixed bag, right? From sort of people, from picnic vibes to like Cal Poly Humboldt taking over buildings. And so I just wanted to ask you, how do you see the encampments as part of the broader struggle to decolonize Palestine, right? Not just ceasefire, not to say solution, but the actual decolonization, and to connect that struggle to those in, say, Haiti, Congo, Sudan, etc.
Maybe we can go in reverse order this time. So we can go Prahlad, Austin, Momodou.
Sure. I think that's a great question because, of course, right now the encampments are at the forefront here, but we always have to tie it to like what is it actually doing materially, and then also what does it represent in terms of the movement. I think that it does work on several levels. One is, universities, especially for example MIT, have long profited from land grabs, from just seizure of native lands and just taking them and saying, okay, this is ours now, and we're just going to start building up. I mean, MIT has been displacing residents in Cambridge for decades, not just physically like by building space, but also by raising rents to unreasonable prices and effectively forcing folks who lived here to move out. Not only that, but it was MIT received its land in the first place by the Morrill Act, the Land Grant Act, which of course is completely legitimate. It never had a claim to the land in the first place. So to me, the act of enacting an encampment is sort of a counter to that narrative in the first place. It says, look, you claim that this is your land and you just grabbed it. Well, we're going to take this. We call this a liberated zone because it is going to become ours. And we're telling you that, we won't stand for MIT saying that it has full control over its own property and saying that it can govern who comes in, who comes out, who is the community, who is not the community. These are questions that MIT never really has to grapple with because it doesn't get challenged in that way from the inside. And so to me, that was one aspect of how powerful the encampment was. Of course, at the forefront is what's going on in Rafah and in Gaza, right? Like that needs to be the focus. And I think the theme with a lot of the encampments that we've seen throughout the U.S. is that they centered the struggle in Palestine. They consistently did educational events. They consistently had speakers who would talk about what's going on in Palestine and how it connects to global struggles. Personally, one of the things I liked a lot about our encampment was that we focused a lot on these educational efforts, was that we focused on emphasizing global solidarity and global struggle. So, of course, they do take different, I guess, like manifestations. Like some of them have been like much more militant, which I think is a great thing. Some of them have been less so. I would say that in the end, the encampments probably universally expose the face of the university as like an arm, an extension of state violence, right? In the end, despite MIT's attempts to like not arrest students and to say, oh yeah, we're going to be the peaceful administration or stuff like this, right? They arrested students. They had a police raid where 200 to 250 cops came down, including state troopers, to arrest 10 students, right? They had violent arrests happen at the garage that was blocked off. So, in the end, no matter what university you're at, recognizing and exposing that state violence and the potential for it, but also the willingness to use state violence to control students and to control the student body. That is something that I think resonates a lot with the struggle in Palestine, because of course, Palestine is another story of state violence used to oppress a people for decades.
Yeah, I mean, I think really well said, Prahlad. I think the exposure. One thing that people that are involved that I saw who were at the encampment and not at the encampment in at MIT, I think are seeing now is the complicity in a real more embodied way, right? In MIT and seeing MIT being willing to sort of sick the police, on their students, willing to basically have a military operation at 4 a.m. And to arrest 10 students and arrest students previously the day before, have 5 police officers, to take down like 110-pound student, right? Is like, and seeing that and people seeing their friends and comrades suffering in that way, I think is really critical in terms of like how does that connect to Palestine. I think it is a really clear show of what these folks are willing to do to defend their really actually small material ties to genocide, right? And like it's and how important that political and symbolic tie is, how unwilling they are to wrestle themselves away from Zionism and away from the influence of the Zionist state, and the money and the sort of domination, the participation and domination that comes with that. I think that aspect is something that's really clear. I think what's also really clear is that, at least in the case of MIT, the ties with the Zionist state are probably the most egregious because MIT is, to our knowledge, the only university that directly contracts with the Israeli Ministry of Defense, right? And so those ties are really clear. They work on autonomous swarming drone projects. They work on underwater surveillance projects as well. And so those are really clear. But monetarily, they're pretty small, right? It's like $11 million over the last 9 years, right? It's not that much for a school that has $25 billion endowment, right? But it's symbolic, right? And it also sets a precedent that MIT might have to actually think about the work that it's doing that leads to genocides elsewhere, human rights abuses elsewhere, right? And think about actually, answering for being part of the imperialist war machine, right? And so I think that aspect of the encampments sort of showing and visibilizing that is really critical. I also think what Prahlad mentioned around and started to talk about a little bit around like, or to extend a little bit of what he was saying about this as kind of like an experiment and a container for people to actually understand what it feels like to take power. Prahlad and I were both there last Monday, a week ago, when like students not only literally took down the barricades that they had put around us, but stood their ground and forced and said no to the university, right? And to the institute, and basically held our ground and kept the camp when it was tried to be shut down, right? And I think for so many people, you could sort of see this was the first time people really had a experience of like, oh wait, like I have power. Collectively, we have power. And just because this institute that has this force of the power of the state, all this money, all of these things, and control over our lives says we have to do something, doesn't mean we have to do it, right? And yes, there's consequences afterwards, right? We've both been suspended, right? And more things have happened, right? Folks have been arrested as well and brutalized too. But that experience of like actually taking that power is something that's strong. And I think one day something that really resonated with me to the, Sharice, you mentioned around like the connections with other places. One morning I got up and I was sort of walking around the camp, got coffee, was sitting, like got some food and just was sitting down, and there was a Palestinian comrade who was there, and she was just like, sitting there with her keffiyeh on. She had a Che Guevara shirt, and she was reading A History of Pan-African Revolt. And I was like, and she just like was casually sitting there reading, and I was like, oh, like, she was like, oh yeah, I just picked it up. It looked interesting. And then she was like, yeah, I just read about the Haitian Revolution. I didn't realize how tactically and strategically they were responding to the French Revolution and how that influenced what they did. And so like those moments are moments that don't happen in regular everyday life when you're not in a space like this liberated zone, right? Obviously, those are things that can happen, in a book club or whatever, but stuff like that was happening every day. We had folks in the AAPRP come by and do a poetry zine making workshop, and we read poetry together, and the energy that people felt around jointly reading liberation poetry together and then saying like, oh shit, like this is powerful, right? These are things that we are actually connecting, and not only sort of saying, we believe in liberation, we believe in XYZ thing, but also we believe in that, and we're out here struggling and fighting against this node of the kind of imperialist war machine, like I mentioned, right? So even if it's a small thing, I think building that power is important. And then the number of folks that we've had who were from Gaza or who were from Palestine, whose families have said, hey, we see what you're doing, right? One of the Al Jazeera reporters who was at our camp oftentimes, came up to us the day of the, we kind of said no to the university and said, we get calls every day from people in Palestine that are saying how important it is that y'all are doing this, and that they don't feel like they're alone, right? That they know that people are fighting where they can fight. And so, I think it's this kind of joint inspiration. The Palestinian resistance is inspiring us to do this. And then in turn, the little that we can do here in the belly of the beast to sort of reflect that back and say, hey, you are not alone. We are also fighting with you. I think is really critical and really important, that inspiration. And then, ideally, hopefully it also leads to a little bit of the state here having to sort of deal with this and recognize this and say, actually, like, maybe we do need to delay some of those weapons shipments. Maybe we do need to stop some of this stuff. And hopefully that, it's not going to be immediate, but we know this is a long struggle. And so hopefully some of that stuff builds. And I think as well, the encampment doesn't, it certainly, our encampment is over, but it's still alive and well, right? Within us, and we're still kicking.
Great. I mean, yeah, definitely very similar experiences. My personal experience is a bit more limited. Cornell got my ass up out of there after day 2, so they said we're not about to have you on this campus anymore. So my experience is limited. But what I can say, given still organizing, obviously behind the scenes and still involved in the encampment, I think what I saw in that moment was a complete rejection and confidence in the university's ability to be a place of education anymore. In those moments of liberated zones and the setting up of teachings, we said, you know what, we are going to take back the power of, we realize that you are beholden to finance capital, you are beholden to your donors, and you being an educational institution is just a side hustle. You're not invested in your students, because if you were, you would listen to what the students are saying, and this is the increasing majority. So I think in the liberated zone, what was so special for us is that we had teachings about Congo. We had teachings about Haiti was brought up. We said, hang on a minute. I mean, people are constantly making the connections. We're like, hang on a minute. How is Israel's one of main exports is diamonds when there's no bloody diamond mines in Israel, for example? Like we started making these constant material connections. And again, Prahlad, you mentioned the Morrow Act. Cornell received some of the largest land in the country through the Morrow Act, right? And we had a similar kind of thing. Okay, when we're talking about land back United States and Turtle Island, we clearly have the connection of land-backed indigenous folk, or native folk at least, in Palestine. So constantly I find out what was indicative to me about this moment, though, was the invocation of 1969 as opposed to the anti-apartheid struggle. And that was a very deliberate thing, because as much as we can talk about the successes of the anti-apartheid, South Africa today, we have many critiques of South Africa today, right? We know that with the power of change in terms of image, but fundamentally the material in terms of acquisition and ownership of land did not change. But I think what we were doing through the invocation of 1969, we were valorizing resistance. Like 69 is the Viet Cong, defeating US imperialism. And I think what's beautiful to see in this moment is that we're not having that kind of feverish approach to resistance. And I think time and time again with that invocation, people are losing their fear about, okay, can I speak about what does decolonization entail? And I think what has also been exposed, particularly with resistance, is all those people who made a career speaking about decolonization. All those people who made a career about, indigenous struggle, decolonization isn't a metaphor. Okay, then what is it? Right? Then what is it? If it's not a metaphor, then what is it? And I don't understand what people actually thought. You thought you're going to have all these kids reading Fanon and think it's cool. And when they start talking about Fanon, and Fanon is saying that decolonization is a violent affair, everyone's going to be quiet and think, why don't Palestinians just resist differently? Well, they tried that, right? So I think what has been beautiful in this moment with all the pain and suffering that we're seeing is that I think Zionism is the weakest it's ever been ideologically. And I think we're going past a threshold that we'll never go back to. And I think to the detriment of so many of my anti-Zionist Jewish colleagues, the label anti-Semitism has been hollowed out. It's been hollowed out because people I kid you not, I'm in London right now. And I had like someone from the hood say to me, it's them bloody Zionists. Like they people are like with the most distinct precision making a difference between Zionism and Judaism. And I think if you lost people on the ground like that, then Zionism is finished, right? So I think what was beautiful for me in this moment is the constant education, the constant building of community. And I think we're going to go into the struggles because I think looking back now, political education was good but didn't go far enough, and I'd love to explore what I mean by that, because encampment was an experiment and we have a long way to go in terms of our organizing.
Yeah, there was so much there. I was just gonna say, I don't know if y'all noticed it, but when Austin first mentioned taking power, baby Sankara raised her hand. She was like, yes. But so I'm curious. So I'm curious then, because Austin, you mentioned that there's a lot of the struggles have been around divestment, right, in terms of the encampments. But you were saying with MIT in particular, there's not so much money, but there are other things sort of at stake. And so I wanted you all to maybe talk about what your specific demands were in terms of the universities, where you all are. I know Cornell announced that their encampment would be ending. I'm not sure if it has ended yet, and I know MIT's has ended. So I would like to also hear you all maybe talk about what kinds of responses you've gotten to those demands, if there's been any semblance of success in terms of getting a response from your universities. So I'll hold it there for those two, and maybe we can start with you, Austin, and then bounce around that way this time.
Yeah, for sure. So the demands at MIT, like I mentioned, are maybe some of the more straightforward ones as well, because the program and the ties are so kind of egregious. And so basically the demands at MIT are just to cut all the funding ties with the Israeli Ministry of Defense, right, and IOF, right? And so those are primarily housed between two programs, like I was mentioning, that, fund sort of autonomous swarming drones, and then sort of like an underwater surveillance program, right? And
why aren't they surveilling fish?
Right.
What's going on?
Right. That's what they say, right? So, and Prahlad could talk a little bit more about some of those things specifically as well, because he was on the research team as well that dug into a lot of this stuff. But those two things, because all of us know probably like MIT is, referred to as like Pentagon East, right? And like is an appendage of, the US defense industry, more or less. And I think where we sort of sat with we actually did have lots of negotiations, right? Our negotiations team from the encampment and from the Coalition for Palestine went into many negotiations with the administration. And so it's interesting how the administration has tried to play it publicly and sort of say like, oh, well, these students just didn't want to, they weren't willing to like negotiate. And it's like, no, actually every time that the negotiation stalled was because the administration pulled out, and community and faculty actually had multiple uproars and said, you can't just pull out and then threaten to arrest these students if you're not actually going to really hear them out. And we were the only ones that actually gave a concrete proposal, right? We presented language, and actually we presented language that has precedent in previous MIT policies from the Epstein days, right? And which was not that long ago, but that MIT created because of those things. And so actually, I think not only was ours like the most clear, it's also just very reasonable because it really is these clear ties. Now, the problem is that those ties are deeply connected to the U.S. Department of Defense, right? And the U.S. Department of Defense is deeply connected to, the Zionist state and the Ministry of Defense there, right? And so there were sort of bigger things at play beyond just the money, right? As I was saying before. And so that was one of the areas where, they were really unwilling to budge, because they said, basically, what some of the negotiators said is they basically said, we're willing to give you anything except what you asked for, right? We're willing to negotiate with you around anything except for cutting these ties with the IOF and the Israeli Ministry of Defense. We'll create a Palestinian center. We'll do whatever other things, right? We'll like create scholarships and like do all this other, crap that doesn't actually address any of the material connections with the genocidal Zionist state. And so for us, it was really, around that. And so where it ended was that they decided to use police force. They decided to use suspensions, right, and do all of these things to basically try to silence us, right? And I think one of the things that was interesting that Momodou said, it was actually really funny because I mentioned this the other day at a speak out that we had with our grad student union. But as you said, they want you to read Fanon, but then when you start to apply some of the things, right, like MIT gave me multiple awards for civil rights for creating and running like a civil rights trip, right, where we studied civil disobedience, where we talked about how Black people got civil rights in the 60s right here and all the things that went into that. But then in my letter, it literally says you are being punished for engaging in civil disobedience, right? And so it's it's funny where they say like they're literally willing to give you awards to do these things, but if you apply it on anything that relates to them, they're going to suspend you, they're going to arrest you, they're going to do all this stuff. And so none of that is surprising to any of us. But I think what's clear is that MIT is saying we are willing to basically die over these ties to the Israeli regime, or we are willing to brutalize you all. We are willing to suspend and potentially expel some of our best and brightest students in order to not give up these ties, right? And so that has become really clear with the encampment and with the destruction of it, and basically how MIT has basically pulled out of negotiations right now. So Prahlad, I don't know if you have more you want to go into too about some of those details around like that specific stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely jump in, and I mean, I'll give you examples of like projects that, I mean, we did a lot of research to figure out like what are these projects and what are they doing. I work in quantum technologies, and an example of a project that sounds really innocent and sounds all well and good is like, there's one, I think it was called terahertz quantum cascade lasers, right? And if you don't know the field, it's like, oh, that sounds like some science stuff that maybe somebody's interested in learning about, but like, sure, it gets military money, but maybe it doesn't do anything. Well, if you look at missile defense systems, a lot of them actually work with quantum cascade lasers, like targeting the targeting practices done with quantum cascade lasers because they're super precise. There's always a reason that the military is involved, right? There's always a reason. And, to give you an example, I used to work with a government contractor, Georgia Tech Research Institute. And like we craft everything for the military, right? I mean, you can put a project out that says it's about DNA strands tangling up together. But actually what you're really doing is you're doing math, you're doing a bunch of math, and that math is going to go toward research for tossing ribbons into helicopter blades to try to take helicopters down, right? So I think it's an important thing. Like, MIT constantly tried to use this idea of academic freedom. Scholars should be able to study whatever they want, but they never addressed what our demand was, which is the funding, right? You can study what you want, but I mean, if you're going to be funded by the military, where it's going. And that it ought not to go there, right? They were unwilling even to meet our basic principle, which I find is still to this day shocking. The first principle that we put forward was any partnership that MIT had, research partnership that MIT has with any entity that is plausibly accused on the international stage of genocide and or has several human rights violations ongoing, that partnership ought to end. And MIT said no.
Well, then the U.S. wouldn't be able to partner with itself, right? Because
exactly.
They started genocide in 1951, so it's like.
No, you're fully right. You're fully right. And I mean, but we actually thought of that, and we said, okay, well, we'll make it foreign. We'll make it foreign entity, and still they said no, right? So like it's these kinds of things that show you. Austin was talking about how like it's these small ties. These materially, it's like the few projects that are going on that MIT is refusing to cut, but it's from MIT's perspective, it's a different game. They're not playing the game of maybe like, $4 or $5 million. They're trying to play the game of, $3 or $4 billion from the DoD. And they're just afraid to risk that. They're in bed with the DoD and are unwilling to get out of it. Right. I mean, we have an institute here called the Institute for Soldier Nanotechnologies. right? There's no question of it. If you go in there, every door is decorated with like one of those old war propaganda posters, right? MIT doesn't hide it. They're fully complicit in the military, and they're an extension of the military academic industrial complex. There's no question. I would say, like, in terms of the negotiations, I think the communication that's come from the administration makes it always seem like the administration was willing to come in good faith, right? But I think the single example that shows that they were never willing to come in good faith is that we had, on the day of the suspensions, when they first issued them, we had a negotiation meeting planned, and they suspended the whole negotiation team. So, I mean, like, how are you going to have a negotiation discussion when you literally just ban them from the campus? It doesn't make any sense, right? They were never willing to come at this in good faith. They consistently refused to even acknowledge our demands, to meet even the fundamental principles that underlie them. They also, basically had a bunch of veiled threats while they were doing it, right? They said, "Oh, it's been peaceful so far, but we don't have to keep it like that," as if state violence is something that they can just release on at will. And in the end, they did, right? They did release that, but I think it really hurt them to have to do that. That to me is like one of the, although the encampment is ended, one of the victories of the encampment has been exposing MIT's willingness to engage in state violence rather than address these demands that are coming from reasonable students, right? That are coming from people who actually have consciousness and conscience on this campus. Austin was saying it's like these students who are actively engaging with the moral question, who are actively engaging with what it means to be a scientist in the world, to be a globally aware scientist, somebody who understands what it means for science to fall into the wrong hands. For MIT to just blanket suspend those folks, for MIT to not care what they have to say, it shows you that this isn't necessarily the place of learning that everybody thinks it is. It's an extension of that military industrial complex. It's exactly what the military wants. It's a training ground for people who are just going to sit down, shut up, do whatever research needs to happen, and not even question what's where it's going, what it's for, whether it's for something good, whether it's going to have a positive impact. I think another example from earlier in the campaign, months ago when we were before the encampment, another example that sticks out to me is we had a campaign against the MISTI Israel. So MISTI is a program at MIT that sends students abroad, and there's a partnership with Israel. So MISTI Israel has a fund that sends students to Israel, but it's funded by Lockheed Martin, right? And the program is supposed to send you to do an internship. So you're doing an internship on a project that Lockheed Martin chooses, and MIT claims, oh yeah, well, Lockheed Martin is, it's putting forward these green initiatives, and those are the only projects that you're allowed to work on, right? First of all, that's not true. Like, in the first place, that's just actually false. Some of the projects that have been funded are clearly defense work. But even if that were the case, Lockheed Martin shareholders or their investors voted against reducing emissions. Like, MIT is also complicit in allowing Lockheed Martin to greenwash its name. And, for this weapons manufacturer, which contributes not only to destruction globally, but also to emissions, to the destruction of climate, to the erosion of our atmosphere, MIT was fully okay with that, right? At the same time, just this year, our president launched, as her kind of flagship initiative, launched this eco initiative where she's, super excited about trying to get these eco projects going. What's the first thing that they're going to fund? A new building, right? What are they going to do? They're going to take more land, they're going to destroy more things, and they're going to build more stuff up. The contradictions, I think, have not been clearer at MIT than now. Maybe I think they were probably close to as clear during Vietnam. Close to as clear during South African apartheid, when MIT just refused to divest. But the clarity that we have now, especially in this age where research is kind of being amped up by money, there's a whole bunch of different agents involved in research now. It's not just government funding; it's also a bunch of private funding. It's these companies, like these government contractors who fund a bunch of the research that's going on. This is the moment where we really have to rise up and say, look, we're not going to take this, right? If we're not exercising resistance here in the belly of the beast, resistance elsewhere is not going to work by itself, right? We have to join forces. We have to stand in solidarity, and I think the encampments have been the part of that. It's one of one of the my favorite chants, I guess, from the encampments has been about the student intifada, right? People are calling it the student intifada. People in Gaza are calling it a student intifada, and it's exactly that. We're rising up. We are saying no, and we're putting a stop to it by taking militant action. And to me, that's essential. Like, if we don't do this, it doesn't get done. It doesn't get done across the world.
Yeah. Yeah, brilliant answers as well, responses and very similar experiences. I was also in the negotiating team. And again, they strategically knocked out people who they think are effective negotiators. They knocked out three of our 8 negotiators, but there were 4 core negotiators, and they knocked out 3 out of 4 of us. I think, to give some context to Cornell, though, Cornell is also unique because that bastard Benjamin Netanyahu's father was a professor at Cornell, and he was professor emeritus at Cornell, and he set up all the links between Cornell and the partnerships, for example. So when you see the unmanned drones that destroy people's houses in the West Bank, that specifically comes from Cornell Jacob Technion partnerships research, right? So for us, we're in a distinctly hostile environment. We're in a place in which Hilal is very strong at our university, for example. And many of the board of trustees are openly Zionists. We've had faculty say things like we have to arm Jewish students for their safety. We've had faculty literally say call the encampment illegal settlers, which is so fucking ironic, right? I mean, the pot calling the kettle black, right? But so given that was the environment, we went into negotiations we said, you know what, if we're gonna go for it, let's go for it. We went with like really audacious demands. We went with 8 audacious demands. So things like cops off campus was one, land back, information on where Cornell has its land, to give back the mineral land to indigenous folk. We had the establishment of a Palestinian Studies Center. We had explicit recognition that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. And we had the protections for non-Zionist Jewish voices on campus. And obviously divestment, right? Divestment from 10 specific companies we identified through the research team. And I think what became abundantly clear, though, I know they were not there in good faith. What became abundantly clear for our side is just how stupid these people are. It was beggars belief to see people in decision-making powers know nothing. They're like, oh, what do you mean by ongoing genocide of indigenous people? And I was like, oh, I mean, the land is like not given back to these people. Cornell's land is situated on the graves of indigenous folk of the Gaia Kahona people. And this is the president of the university answering this question. And what was even crazier to me was the biggest thing they said, we're not going to go any further in negotiations unless you stop using the chant, there is only one solution, Intifada revolution. I want to couch that in just 2 weeks ago, the provost invited Ann Coulter to campus. Ann Coulter, the well-known anti-Semite, right? The well-known eugenicist, the racist, everyone, anti-Black, everyone knows Ann Coulter for who she is, right? And then they did that under the purview of, under the guise of, we have to enable free speech in this time. So in this meeting with the CFO, the chief financial officer, who also serves as the chief vice president of the university, I said to him, okay, what about that slogan is problematic? Because they said it's anti-Semitic and it's hate speech. And you're saying that you're not even going to go forward with negotiations unless you deal with this slogan. They said, oh, it's the one solution part. And I have on recording. So I said, oh, you invited Ann Coulter was invited 2 weeks ago. So I said, if I say Jews run the world, is that hate speech or protected speech? He said protected speech. He said, that's, I was like, oh, I was really taken aback. I was like, I asked him 3 times. I said, are you saying this is hate speech? Because you said that the slogan, there's only one solution, Intifada revolution, is hate speech and anti-Semitic. But you're saying that if I say Jews run the world because you invited Ann Coulter who said that, that's protected speech. Yeah, that is protected speech. So again, they were not there in good faith. But they're also extremely idiotic. So when I mean we had to like spell out our demands one by one, we had like 10 pages of addendums for each demand. So but even then, I just think it was stalling, if I'm being honest. If I'm being totally honest, it was just a way of stalling us. Because in the end, we started saying, okay, cool, what are our main demands? They were like, oh, Palestinian Studies Center. They're like, okay, what will that do? And I was like, oh, I mean, Yeah, literally, I'm not even like, I mean, this is like the vice provost, and this is like,
The
again, they always
provost,
deliver.
the person who's in charge of
Vice provost.
academic, still, but their job is to be in charge of academics at the university. And what would a Center for Palestinian Studies? Okay.
Yeah, they're asking us ridiculous questions in these meetings. And, you know, they sent black people. They sent black people to negotiate with us always, you know, bring a black face. The irony being of this woman, I won't say her name because I'm still under some kind of appeal process. But she said to me, you know, what do you mean about cops off campus? I did a lot of digging. Her dissertation for PhD was about abolition and cops off campus. And then she has like the gall to feign ignorance in front of me and ask, what do you mean about cops off campus? So again, we very much quickly knew that these people were not acting in good faith and have no desire to negotiate. The issue being with the encampment, I know MIT came down, we brought our encampment down today, is because not just the fact that they were waiting us out in terms of academic calendar, it became abundantly clear the purpose of the encampment was to, as well as create a liberated zone, was to apply pressure for our demands. And we realized now that was no longer the case. It was no longer applying pressure. Universities very happy to wait us out. And in waiting us out, they're just strategically suspending people they think are key, a part of it. So we brought down an encampment, but it's no way means it's finished. It's no way means we're not, it by no way means we're going to stop what we're doing. But I think it's like, I was listening to a great podcast recently on Lenin, and the speaker was like, people always talk about Lenin being as this audacious revolutionary, which he was, but you also think about time Lenin surrendered, right? You also think about time Lenin has to like retreat. Lenin had to go back and reposition himself to come back better and stronger for your adversary. And I think that's the moment we're at now.
I think that one thing that's just really apparent from you all's conversation, though, is that I think a lot of the external critiques have been that, you know, these are kind of, what do you call it, spontaneous kinds of things. And I think what we hear from all three of you in terms of negotiations teams, in terms of research teams, that this is a very intricately developed process, that you all are very aware of what you're doing. And I think that that's really important to call attention to because of some of the, I think, bad faith critiques that have been out there about student engagement.
Mm-hmm. I will say that I have expressed my own ambivalence about these encampments because I think that you all are particular, right? Having been at, anyway, I think that there's a range, right? And so that's what I want to talk about. So I guess I want to unfold kind of two questions together. One is, how do you manage the different ideologies, strategies, and tactics and commitments that go into not only planning the encampments, but like holding them? Because surely there's a range, right? So there are the people who are like, we not leaving until these demands are met. And then there are others who are literally like, the symbolism is the most important thing, right? And so that's one question. How do you manage that, the very sort of diverse range of people who are participating in these encampments? But then also, what kinds of criticism and self-criticism have you all incorporated into your praxis in these encampments?
I think maybe this round we can start with Momodou.
Yeah, no, great question. And I'm going to be very wary because we are dealing with a lot of internal issues right now, post-encampment. So I'm going to be very wary of not, of course, pissing off my comrades. But I'm going to just keep it real. I think I'll start with self-criticism. I think I should have been a bit more forthright in our political line before going into the encampment, because what became abundantly clear in the encampment was this diverse array of opinions caused problems. And I never have been more sure of my politics being a Marxist-Leninist leaving this encampment, because I'm sorry, I don't know people's political persuasions on here, so no offense to anyone here, but that anarchism stuff did not fucking work on these encampments. Like, I'm going to be totally honest. That anarchism stuff of like wanting to, one thing we did before Columbia, before we started, Columbia said to us, do not get bogged down in hours, endless meetings every single day. It's going to suck out the energy of the encampment. But what happened is, because everyone wants to, like, one thing I've unfortunately come to understand, especially with more younger people, is they think leadership equals hierarchy, therefore oppression. As opposed to my understanding is leadership, experience, trust, right? So we were in like GA meetings like deciding on the most minutiae of details. We took 4 hours, 5 hours every day, and the rule was, unless we reach a consensus one, and every single person had a veto power. Every single person had veto power. And for me, that was just ridiculous, because I thought to myself, I'm so sorry. It's not to say anyone is intrinsically better than anyone. Of course they're not. Of course they're not. But to assume that you all approached politics with the same experiences, the same knowledge, the same background is just patently false. And in my experience, I was just like, anarchists, yeah, you lot are good to set shit up. You lot are good to fuck shit up as well. But when it comes to the political organizing, I'm not with it, because your strategy was just literally held us back constantly. And I think what I'm going to do we've got like a reflection meeting coming on Friday with the group, I'm going to have to be a bit more forthright, because I think initially I didn't want to come across as like some vanguardist or too politically, too wedded to my political beliefs. But I think this experience just literally reinforced why I think I have the beliefs that I did, because it's efficient and it's effective. Having, not to say there have to be permanent leaders, not to say there has to be one leader, but people who have experience in positions of doing certain things, it makes the most sense that those people are in decision-making processes in that role. I don't understand how, for me, it's just efficient and it's effective. So I think, unfortunately, what was, and then again, when, for example, I was in the negotiations team, right? And naturally, you're going to make some decisions on the fly. You have to make some decisions on the fly, because you're in negotiating team. And when I say it became a split in the group every single day, who are you negotiating team? Who do you think you are? You don't speak for the camp. You you don't speak for the camp. And I thought to myself, where is like the grace given, and where is like the trust given? Because we chose these people for a reason, right? So I think what has definitely become abundantly clear for me in this moment is like, I do believe in some kind of leadership, and I think that's the hill I'm gonna die on.
I just want to so I will say, for throwing the anarchists a little lob, they will fight the police. And so the people who were fighting, who were protecting people, a lot of them in different encampments were the anarchists. And so that's another sort of contradiction that, and Momodou, we can circle back to if you want to speak on this, like the emphasis or the insistence on nonviolence, even after y'all are getting your ass whooped. So was there any contradiction between how force or self-defense will also be levied in these spaces, like along with the other question I asked? So
no, I think that's fair. And I think fundamentally my jostle with my anarchist brothers and sisters is theoretical. It's not practical. It's practical, but in the sense that, okay, we disagree with certain things, but on the ground, they're down for the cause, and there are
strategies and tactics, right? Like there are moments where strategically and tactically it makes sense to use different sets of ways of engaging, right? And that all of them have to be on the table.
Yeah. And I think that's what we saw. But I think what you're speaking to, Dr. CBS, as well, in terms of like, there was people who wanted to escalate. There's people that are saying we're not doing enough. There's people who want to like put themselves in harm's way and willing to do so, but some people are not willing to do so. And problem that becomes is that what I don't agree with, though, is the aura of like adventurism. I think it's very easy to look at Columbia, and very easy to look at MIT, and very easy to look at IU and think, I want to do what they're doing. But Cornell is in the middle of nowhere. We don't have the same community support that Columbia does. We don't have we don't have the NYPD, for example. We have Ithaca Police Department, and Ithaca Police Department even said we're not going to get involved. So I understand the want to escalate, but I think fundamentally you have to have an assessment of the material conditions of where you are and act accordingly to that, and not look to what Columbia is doing or other places are doing. And I think, fortunately, what I feel with a lot of the young people, and I understand, again, these people will like have risked a lot, and they were willing to risk like arrest and suspension and expulsion as well. So I don't want to shit on anybody. I have nothing but love for these people. But I think fundamentally what I kept seeing was like, okay, we need to escalate. And I won't even, for the sake of this recording, I won't even say some of the stuff people wanted to do. But again, I'm like, where does that come from? I know where it comes from, because you feel like you're not doing enough, or you want to, you have revolutionary ambitions, which is cool. But fundamentally, we are in a distinctly apolitical campus. The minute we said cops off campus as a demand, about 90% of the student population said, why? Why do you want cops off campus for? Like, they didn't even we're in a different, we're not in other places, right? So I think, but I think fundamentally, I think this summer we need to go through deep political education, and I think we were not prepared going to the encampment. And I think the issues that we had prior to the encampment just became exacerbated in the encampment. So I remember beforehand, like, people were saying things like, when are we going to protest for Ukraine? Or when are we going to protest for Tibet? Or when are we going to protest for all these? And I'm like, obviously, again, I didn't want to shit on nobody, so I'm just keeping quiet, right? But as you can imagine, those things showed up in the encampment. Those political ideologies showed up in the encampments. I think any action we take in the future cannot be done unless we sort out all these internal issues.
Austin or Prahlad, you want to weigh in?
I think Prahlad, you gotta go first.
I think Austin's making me go first because he knows that I'm a political anarchist. So, well, look. I think when it comes to anarchism, like my brand of anarchism is very different from, I think, like what is considered the traditional history of anarchism.
So you're not actually a libertarian. 3 libertarians wrapped up in a trench coat.
No. I consider myself to be following in the kind of syndicalist tradition. I would say this. I think, like, the conclusions that I personally felt as leadership, on the MIT side, sort of come from the other direction. Meaning, I think we started out with very strong leadership, and I think we still have very strong leadership, very, very well defined. We don't have necessarily, like, different factionalism and that kind of thing going on. And at the same time, I think that what we had to learn as leaders and what we had to grapple with was this question of trust in the community, right? Because I think the sort of the leaders of the Coalition for Palestine at MIT were used to calling the shots, right? We were used to kind of making decisions that were real-time decisions. And, I mean, of course, we always have to have reasons for those decisions, but we, in previous cases, when we were running a campaign over months, when we were planning things out for weeks in advance, it was a lot easier to make those decisions and to have, enough space to do that and to build community trust. But in the encampment, every decision was like, you're making a decision for, like, the next day, maybe just like 10 hours from now or 6 hours from now, right? And the decisions started piling up and building, I think, trust with the folks in our community. That was a really important step that I think we sort of overlooked toward the beginning. And we had several conversations. I mean, internally as leadership, we had conversations with folks who were not necessarily like elected leadership or something like this, but were very much leaders of the movement on campus, and people who we trusted as organizers. And I think that was sort of the lesson that we took away, was we actually needed to be a lot more transparent, and we started implementing certain things like town halls and having meetings where we would discuss openly, like, okay, what does a win look like to us? Like, what does a win look like? The same thing? If we're not on the page about, on the same page about what a win looks like, then how do we get on that page? And to what Austin was talking about before, like, the sharpness of our demand was sort of a very broadly unifying thing, right? It became so obvious that the MIT's resistance to this demand and to acquiescing to this demand was purely symbolic. It was like, okay, we, like, financially this means nothing, right? So I think that, getting the community buy-in into our demands, we had to learn how to do that in a differently structured manner. We had to learn how to make decisions in a more organic, community-based manner, which to me, I mean, that personally was actually really, really inspiring, because I personally believe in the power of community, right? And in the power of, I think, forming these, like, syndicates who are in control of, like, certain, like, Momodou, you made a very good point, which is, like, leadership is about experience, right? People who are experienced ought to be, responsible for leading certain things, right? I think the lesson that we learned was everyone in the encampment, to some extent, was an organizer, right? Everyone became an organizer just with their experience in the encampment, and allowing them the chance to, and not allowing, I don't want to even use that word. It's just like making sure that we use that resource, use the organizing capacity of every single person at the encampment. That was the struggle that I think we faced, where I don't think we were doing a great job of it at the beginning. We had some internal discussions about how to do that better, and I think we took some steps toward it. We were changing some things, and we were trying to make the community much more integrated and have a better sense of, like, community buy-in in that sense. I mean, of course, it's an experiment, and it was a short-lived. We weren't the ones who decided the timeline on the experiment, right? So I wish we had more time to really explore that and really build more systems. But by the end, we had a gutter system that was built that was definitely not organized by anyone in leadership, right? For the rain, we had community donations and like a food system that we were managing to make sure that we also gave back to the community. We were taking stuff to shelters. We had a bunch of different organically arranged initiatives that were not necessarily done by leadership. And I think, to me, that was really powerful to see like the syndicalism or the syndicalist approach, slightly anarchist, yeah, but definitely with established leadership. And I think I completely agree with this. Like, I think it's important to have leadership. I think, to me, the difference is just, all institutions have at their core the idea of self-permanence, right? It's like this idea that, okay, I'm going to continue to create the conditions that require me to exist, right? At least to me, that's how I understand an institution. And as someone who considers himself to be an anarchist, that's the premise that I would challenge. It's like, okay, I don't think an institution ought to have at its premise the idea of permanence, right? And I think we try to establish that as an idea in the way we try to organize the camp. Definitely would do things differently if we had another chance, but of course that's the point, right? You don't necessarily get another chance. You have to make these decisions on the fly, and I think it was definitely a learning experience from that perspective. But Austin also like has a different perspective, I'm sure, than I do as well.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, like Prahlad, I was laughing the whole time because like Momodou, when you were talking too, because obviously I know Prahlad's like political leanings, and me and Prahlad had a lot of conversations like over Signal, in person, like, come here, we got to talk, about what's going on. And similar, like I, am probably one of the people that Prahlad, mentioned in terms of like not elected in the like leadership of things, but, have been involved with the coalition, since, October, have been doing a lot of stuff, as different organizational partners and other things like that. I think the thing around self-criticism for me is something that I really harped on throughout, was like, your ego does not matter, right? What matters is Palestinian liberation and what we can contribute to that. And I think that was one of the strengths, honestly, of our movement this entire time, but in particular of the encampment, was being able to come back to that. Also, for me, all of this, like Prahlad said, all of this is anchored in, there's limits to lived experience, as our comrade, Erica has written about, and many other folks have, talked about many times. But we have folks in our encampment from Gaza, from Ramallah, from Jerusalem, who have been, from Syria or Jordan, like, who have been engaged in these things and can teach us a lot about what it means and redirect and say, hey, like, I know this encampment is important. I know this movement is important, but are we centering like Palestinian liberation in this? And I saw that a lot as my role, particularly as someone who is not Palestinian or Arab, to come and back and say like, hey, y'all, are these strategies and tactics actually coming back to the values that we are upholding, right? Because at the end of the day, we have these demands, but like how we get to those demands also matters, right? And how we sort of organize around those demands. Because I think Momodou mentioned earlier, the encampment can end, but how are you organizing? How are you setting yourself up to organize for the long haul in this work? And, I'm not an anarchist, I'm a communist. Like, I agree that like, this is, yeah, there you go, that this is like, but I think so many of the things when you're in that moment, right, it's about what are the strategies and tactics that are going to get us to the next place, right? Some of that might be doing, de-arrest training and thinking about how do we fight back physically, right, if we want to. And then it might also be like, what, let's assess our forces. We don't have the forces to fight physically, right? So like, it actually doesn't make sense for all of us to get arrested. If they're going to bring literally a military battalion, like, we don't have weapons. Like, we're not doing this. Like, it doesn't make sense. It's better for 10 of us to get arrested than it is for 100 of us to get arrested. And all of us are demobilized now. And so I think some of those like town hall things, some of those smaller tactics, right? Things like one of the Palestinian comrades, reached out to me and was like, hey, you've been talking a lot about Attica. Like, do you want to talk about like resistance? And me and like having a conversation like a closed tent conversation about what does this mean, right? And like Momodou said, right, some of those things I won't say for the purposes of the recording, but like those are things where you actually think through, like what would it mean to do this, right? What would it mean to follow through with some of these things? And so I think that is really critical. I also think there were many times for me as well as like, how are we taking care of our people? One, as a moral and ethical charge to like, we need to take care of the people that are around us. But also, if we're using the encampment as a political tool, we can only go as far as this community is prepared to go as a whole, right? So even if you have your sort of leadership or these folks that are ready to move, someone I think in the comments asked about the class character of MIT. Compared to some schools that MIT is compared to, MIT actually has a decent number of like folks from like a working class poor background because it's like a sort of meritocratic, a little bit more meritocratic, right? It doesn't have legacy admissions, things like this. But in general, the class character is very much, it's people that are going to be entering like the bourgeois, like, or petty bourgeois, like classes, right? That are going to be sort of technocrats or engineers or, filling these roles. And so for people that are sitting there, there is this really thing of like, yes, I care about Palestinian liberation, but also am I willing to sacrifice what will be a very lucrative career immediately after graduating for that, right? And so I think that's something that you really saw when people were considering, do I want to be green team, yellow team, red team? Do I want to engage in this strategy and tactic versus some of the folks in other schools, right? And then also, I think it's very real, the violence that we face. While my comrades were, some of them were brutalized by the police, folks do have injuries, right? Did end up in the urgent care, the ER, right? And things like that. We were still not subjected to the violence of some of the schools like City College in New York, some of the schools like, Cal Poly, some of the schools like UT Austin that have a much more kind of like public character to them. And so there is like a real thing in Boston and in these areas, even in Boston, like Emerson and some of the schools that are in like the downtown area that have a much different class character than MIT were subjected to stronger violence there. And some MIT students were there when that happened as well. But I think in this broader question, just the strategies and tactics, it was one of the roles that I saw myself playing was really trying to keep people focused, keep people coming back. And I think that that's something that, the Cuban Revolution, having been to Cuba many times, has taught me is like, you need to be those values, that politics needs to always be in command, right? And you need to always be coming back to that, because the expediency of any demand, the expediency of like any sort of like emotional feeling. And there were a lot of emotional feelings when those Zionist counter protesters would come around and taunt us. And I was like, yeah, y'all, I know what you want to do. Right. But like also we need to come back to like our values and to centering what is our role in advancing Palestinian liberation from our point here. And if that action is not going towards that, not that we always have to be perfect, but that's something that we need to self-criticize, and also just be able to come back to as a community. And we didn't always do that successfully. And, some of those things we still need to, I think, unpack. And there are still conversations that I know I want to have, but, I was planning to have them the night that we got raided, right? So it's like we didn't get the chance to have them yet. So, those things are still in the back of my mind too. But it's a process, right? And I think getting folks in at the encampment, I think it showed in a much more concentrated way how you need to do these things much more rapidly, right? Unity, criticism, unity, however you want to sort of think about things like that, right? If that's your philosophy or not, I think it really allows us to kind of say like, okay, we started to implement and test some of these things out. That was the beginning. Right now, we need to really think about how do we employ that militancy more broadly through our organization as a whole, and not just think of ourselves as students, but really think of ourselves as organizers, as people involved in a militant and long-term struggle.
There is just so much in this conversation, and we could really go on for quite a while, but I just want to So to our audience, we usually are wrapping up around this time. We're going to go a little bit longer, just so folks know. I think we'll do one more question each between CBS and I, and we'll do this. So
keep it brief.
So I'm actually interested in. So I know, like Momodou, I was talking to you, and I remember you said to me that you did not tell your folks what you were engaged in, and that they discovered you on TV, right? That they saw you, like you got a call from your mom. I saw you on Al Jazeera, WTF, right? And so I'm interested in one, and I think both Momodou and you all mentioned. You all have both faced the level of repression. So you've been suspended. Austin, you literally defended your thesis, and then other things happened. So I wanted to hear from you all about your experiences with repression and from the university, and how you have navigated making those decisions about what might be too far for you to go as an individual, what is important to keep doing because of the collective cause, why is it that you are willing to take those L's in that kind of way. And I want to just, I want you all to the degree that you're comfortable, really share what your punishments have been and what that means and how that plays out for you all. I don't know what
Should I go?
In terms of, go first. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you're right. I mean, my mum phoned me and said, I saw you on Al Jazeera. I heard you've been suspended. And I was like, yep, here we go. But I think, fundamentally, I'm going to probably answer the question back to front. Why am I willing to take the L's that I did? And I think not even true. There's no point of acting with bravado. And whilst I have my principles and I'm still committed to them, of course, I fear my future, right? Because I put in a lot of time and effort getting into this school and trying to complete my degree, right? So I of course I fear that, but I don't think I feel deterred, because I often say to myself, there's no world in which if I manage to reach 80 years old, I'm going to be like, fuck, I went too hard for Palestine, right? There's no world that's ever going to happen. But I will regret not doing the opposite. So I know that for a fact. But my repression has been, if I'm going to be totally honest, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, the university administration handed my ass to me. And they they played it very surgically. And I think one lesson I'm taking away from that is that I definitely underestimated how the university is going to play it, right? Because I wasn't actually at the encampment when I got suspended, ironically. I was at the encampment the day before. I was a part of the yellow team because I'm an international student. My comrades were like, listen, don't risk your visa. And the yellow team for us meant that the red team, for example, meant you're not leaving no matter what. Police, state troopers, threats of expulsion, you're not leaving. Yellow team was if they threaten arrest or suspension, you leave. Yeah, because of my visa situation. And then if you're green team, you don't come inside the encampment, you're on supplies, you're on other first aid, whatever it may be, or safety, for example. So I was at the encampment the day before, and then we were in negotiations all day with admin. And the time they said I was still at the encampment, which is 8 p.m. on the Thursday, I was literally still in negotiations on the art squad, which is where our encampment was, with the CFO. The CFO himself, which in an unprecedented move, was the one that lodged the complaint against me directly. Because he said that, I think he just probably thought I was a smart ass, I'll be honest, and I embarrassed him. And he probably felt personally offended. But he alleged that I was on the encampment. One of the claims was, you led chants which were disturbing to people. And one of the ones was, you built an encampment which there's no evidence of. And another claim is that I was on the art squad after 8 p.m., which I was, but I was negotiating with him. The second day, when I arrived to campus, not at the encampment once again, is when I had received the email saying you've been suspended, effective immediately. The temporary suspension is usually administered when your behavior is such a danger to the campus. You have to be removed immediately. And they said, so benevolent of them that I can keep my healthcare and I can keep access to food, which, again, I don't have access to food for Cornell anyway. So they told me to get back to them within a certain deadline to talk about the conditions of my suspension. So then obviously I went to, we were unionized recently. I invoked my Weingarten rights. I took my union with me. And again, it was just seeing these liberals. The woman, the director herself said to me, yeah. I said to her, how do you justify the suspension? Where's the due process? She said to me, I can admit to you there's been no investigation. I'm not going to let you see the incident report either. And I said, okay, so how are you justifying this suspension? We have received an incident report. I said, from who? I said, from the CFO. The CFO, I said, okay, well, is the police involved? No, the police have not been involved. I said, that how do you not say this is political and this is nothing to do with due process? I can't share that information with you. All I have to say is that your behavior is a danger to campus, and that unless you take this deal, and the deal they're offering basically was saying that if you don't reply within 24 hours, and these were her words, we're going to de-enroll you and then inform immigration. And immigration said to me, you have 48 hours to leave the country, right? So I was like, okay, so what options do I have? They go, either that you take a deal of not going to NEDA encampment, take all incompletes for this semester, and that was it. And I was like, well, it doesn't leave me much. But I kind of went back. So I said, I'll get back to you. I went back to the comrades. I said, listen, I'll be honest with you. Whatever decision you make as an encampment, don't let my suspension be like sway your decision in anything. I said that this is against me personally, and I will deal with it. And then I think what the university had thought is, if they suspend me, the encampment's going to come down, because again, they targeted international students for a reason. But it didn't work out like that. So then my attorney wrote in, and my attorney said, okay, cool. If you can guarantee that I get my summer funding, if you can guarantee it's not admission of guilt, if you can guarantee that I can appeal the decision, and if you can guarantee that you won't de-enroll me, which means I can keep my visa, I'll take the deal, right? I took the deal. Well, I kind of played a little bit. I changed deadlines several times, took the deal finally. And then they came back again, handing my ass to me. Okay, thanks for taking the deal. You have incompletes for this semester. You have to repeat the work. And you're going to keep active student status. So you keep your visa, but we'll keep you a suspension because the encampment is still up, which wasn't the initial plan or the initial deal. And I have that in writing, right? But they don't care. Again, the provost himself, who's a right-wing bigot, who's, funnily enough, Cornell's president just resigned a couple of days ago, and the provost is now taking over as interim president. So we have our work cut out for us, but that's another story for another day. So the situation right now is that I'm still suspended. What happened is the union came in and said, listen, because we unionized about 4 months ago, but we haven't got a contract yet. And the union then put in a formal demand to bargain for our suspensions. The university initially rejected it, saying, no, we're going to discipline you on the student code of conduct and not as a worker. And the university constantly plays this game between being a worker and being a student, right? They constantly do this. And they're trying to say the student code of conduct supersedes your rights as a worker, which is nonsensical, because I wasn't able to enter grades as a worker. As soon as I got suspended, I got removed of Canvas, which is obviously our online portal. How do I perform my duties? How do I do my work, right? And I don't get paid as a stipend. I get paid every 2 weeks as an employee. So in the end, the university then accepted the formal demand to bargain. My union then put in a ULP, unlawful labor practice, and we're going through that at the moment. But I think given the encampment is down, I'm going to start my appeal process. Also, as well, what they did say initially was that you have to agree not to violate university student policy and put it in writing, which means be quiet. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And in the end, they kind of said, okay, yeah, you can't. Yeah, it's your First Amendment. And they kind of went back on that. So where things are now, I'm still suspended. I've taken the deal, which is not a deal. I mean, having a whole semester go to waste isn't a deal, right? Being suspended isn't a deal, right? But that's where it's at right now. I keep my active student status, so I keep my visa, and hopefully I can appeal it once the investigation takes place, and I hopefully get it overturned. Would I do it again? Absolutely. Do I regret anything? No. I think I would do, probably knowing I did what I did with the information that I had. So I think the same thing would happen again. For me, where I'm at now, it's okay. I think you know what? For me, what I keep reminding myself is, look, any consequences I'm facing pales in comparison to what our brothers and sisters are going through in Gaza right now. So at the very worst case scenario, looking like I have to delay my degree by 6 months, for example, or I might not get summer funding, for example. I think, okay, that pales in comparison to what people are actually going through and the reason why I'm out here in the first place. So that's where it's at now.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I resonate a lot. I mean, I think it's similar. Obviously, I don't have visa status, but it's a similar, story here. I think to the question of like what's happened. So I basically got suspended last Wednesday for activities last Monday, primarily going through that process right now. So going through the process with our union. Luckily, we actually got a contract at the beginning of this at the beginning of this school year in September. So we had fought for that. So I'm very grateful for myself and other people as well that fought for that to get that before this. And I know the administrators are kicking themselves as well for that happening. And so similar thing of, they basically said you are suspended, you can't finish classes. I had 1 week left for my credits to graduate. I'm supposed to graduate in like 2 weeks, right? So I can't finish my credits that I need to graduate, can't enter my thesis into the official whatever thing, even though I've done my defense. I can't work anymore, so I got basically laid off from my research assistant job. My fellowship stipend that I get every month is canceled, so I don't get that. And my fellowship is also for racially just research, which is, I think, very funny that they canceled that. And basically, I'm not allowed on campus either, right? And so I don't live on campus. I don't depend on campus for my dining and things like that. But some of our comrades, are being evicted on Wednesday. And there's a bunch of other things going into that. So, I think similar, I was, the university, the one thing, I'm not surprised by most things. The one thing I am surprised by is I didn't think it would be so vindictive and selective. They are very, I think, like, I don't like these people. And those people I am suspending, like, because there are certain people that were there that did similar things. The consequences are all over the place. Who is getting suspended is all over the place. We know for a fact that when some of our comrades were arrested, they basically had a list of like 75 to 100 people that they came in checking, and they haven't suspended all of those people. So there are people that they are sort of, checking for. I also I don't think I internalized the level of coordination with the feds that they have and the police that they are working with, and that they're doing to identify people. So that was something that I think was like, okay, now I know that, right? But similar to what Momodou said, like, I don't think I would change anything based on the information that I had at the time, right? And based on even honestly some of the information I have now. Obviously, it would have been great to not be suspended, right? But, I'm going to be honest that, well, let me not, these things are still ongoing. So I won't say too much, but I do think there are certain things where, it's worth standing in your principles, right? And it's worth sitting there and then taking that. I like to quote George Jackson all the time. I like to quote other folks who have all the Palestinian resistance, right? These are folks that gave their lives, right, for their principles. That gave their lives for the struggle. And I'm certainly not trying to become a martyr, right? I don't aspire to that, but we also can't back down in our principles, right? When we're fighting. And I think every time, what really motivated me is not only those principles, but then also seeing my comrades who haven't spoken to their family in Gaza in 36 hours, right? Who don't know what's going on, like if their families are alive or not. And even those that aren't, who are, from Jerusalem, who are from Ramallah or the West Bank, elsewhere in the West Bank, or even in the diaspora, right, who are spread out in Jordan, in the US, out here, anywhere, what they are facing, what people even here, my ancestors have faced in the past to fight for liberation, right, to fight for justice. For me, it pales in comparison. Right. Me not getting my master's degree or not getting it on time. Right. So like, the suspension that I got might result in me having to repeat a semester, right? Having to pay, $25,000 or something like that in order to get my degree, or it might just be a huge headache. Right. And that sucks. Right. That obviously sucks. Right. They might hold me in limbo for a long time. But I think, again, this is a long struggle. And if we're not willing to make certain sacrifices along that struggle, then we're never going to get anywhere. Right. So for me, I feel very, I'm not necessarily proud to be suspended, but I think I would have been looking back what Momodou said, right, of being able to say, like, did I stand on this thing that I was preaching? And I feel like I was able to at least do that in a small way. Right. And to sort of in doing that, was able to, like, even if that victory was followed by sort of a punishment, to sort of have that temporary victory and that taste of what it feels like to actually be empowered and to exercise your power, and to say whatever this university is going to do later, we are actually staking our claim in the ground right now, standing on our principles and refusing to be moved.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would echo a lot of what Momodou and Austin have said, especially when it comes to like the sacrifices that I'm willing to make. I think, look, at the end, if I want to remain a student organizer, I do have to remain a student, which is the reality of it. There are some things that I think are definitely worth risking. There are other things that I think are, when it comes to expulsion, for example, if people are risking expulsion, there are certain reasons to do so, right? But you have to also think about what that means for your organizational capacity, what that means for the movement on campus. So there's also broader things to consider there, as well as your own goals, and like, trying to be able to make sure that you can still remain in a space where you have, whatever power you can derive in this like super screwed up society, right? In terms of what I like personally faced, I mean, like very similar stuff. I got suspended for sure, full interim suspension, meaning like I'm living, I mean, like right now I'm in my dorm, but I will no longer be in my dorm after 5 p.m. on Wednesday because I'm being evicted. So I got to do a lot of packing, it looks like. I also got arrested. I'm not sure how I feel about that in general. I mean, I think like, there's value to being arrested. There's value for the movement, but also being arrested now is like very different from being arrested, like, I think during Vietnam, for example. I mean, now they got my fingerprints, they got everything on me, right? Like we do live in a police state and in a highly militarized state. But I do think, looking back, I wouldn't change like most of the sacrifices I made. Maybe I would have changed how things happened to be more strategic or slightly different to match where the movement was. But I don't think I really would have changed what's happening. I mean, a lot of it's still ongoing. Like, what Momodou was talking about with the union struggle. We're going through that union struggle right now. The union is definitely tapped in making sure that they can advocate for our rights. I am a first year, so like I guess the consequences for me from a graduation standpoint and that kind of thing were much less, which is, I think, maybe also part of why I was like able to risk a little bit more in terms of like putting myself out there for suspension and that kind of thing. I think it would have been really hard for me not to be suspended, or it would have been a really curious turn of events. But yeah, I do think that they were also, just to echo what Austin said, they were also very targeted with who they chose. I mean, I even think that they, collaborated with some of the folks who have been sort of agitators against us in order to figure out certain names of people who, like, there are people who I don't think were that visible, who are leaders in the movement in the backseat, in the not in the backseat, but in the kind of like behind the scenes, who got hit with suspensions out of nowhere, right? Despite, I mean, the charges against them are completely false. Like they weren't at the encampment, for example, because they were international, for example. It's a valid reason not to be there, but they got hit with these charges. Anybody who is like visible in media, I think, was hit by suspensions or something. So I do think, that's something to reflect on, is like there is a significant amount of collaboration. I mean, it's nowhere more obvious than when they raided the camp and they brought in like 200, police officers, most of them state troopers, also Cambridge PD and then also MIT PD. And then, on my arrest form, it says that MIT PD is the one who made the arrest. Like, I don't know about that one, So I do think that there's like a level of collaboration that we've unearthed here that is frankly horrifying, very shocking. I do think, what I hope is that the way that people perceive these arrests, suspensions, is not a demobilizing moment, but actually a galvanizing moment. And we're in the midst of trying to see what we can do now, to sort of keep the energy up on campus and keep the energy going. But certainly, this is a moment where like people can get scared, people can get afraid of what's going on. But I think the stronger we stand against it, the more we're going to be able to do in the future, even to build coalition to stand against what the university has been doing in a variety of contexts. So I do think it's worth it to risk a lot to make things happen.
All right. So for the last question, this is Life Study Revolution. So what are some of the texts, the individuals, the organizations that have inspired you to engage in this struggle, and who would you recommend folks read, like, for this moment, right, and for the next steps, whatever is to come next in this struggle in the belly of the beast for a decolonized, free, and flourishing Palestine and smashing Zionism?
So I'm going to jump on because I'm not going to go after Momodou because I know Momodou is going to have some fire. So let me go first. I think for me, there's a couple of things that like continue to resonate. I think you tweeted about this, CBS, about people should be reading Tip of the Spear or Sami Burden's book on Attica. That definitely has been really essential in terms not only of thinking about like what rebellion has looked like in a different context, but in this country as well, but also what does it look like to think about liberation and a commune, right? And freedom from that perspective. So that definitely has been on there. I've been also coming back to some of my like baby socialist roots with Guevara, like Che Guevara, and just thinking about some of the guerrilla tactics and action and also, kind of the philosophy of 2-3 mini Vietnams and what that looks like, to spread that movement and to spread that out. A couple of other, I guess, things. Ella Baker, I think, is always sort of like a shining light for me in terms of how do you think about people in a movement? How do you think about organizing from a people-centered perspective and empowering people, not in a liberal sense, but like in the sense of actually like, you can only go as far as the people are prepared to go. Right? Like, regardless of how strong your leaders are, if the people that you're leading are not also going along those lines, they're not also moving, then where are you going to end up, right? And what are you building while you are in that fight, right? And then I think honestly, a bunch of I think in this movement, in particular, in building the encampments and in struggling and going by there, Amilcar Cabral. I think so many of the writings, so many of the understanding of culture as a material thing, right? As and how you build culture under oppression, how you also engage in guerrilla tactics and in war and actually bring down, fascism, the colonial aspects of fascism, right? That might be right in front of you, as well as contributing to a broader struggle, and that being really centered on culture, centered on building culture. I think for me is really, really critical. And I guess the last one for me is to June Jordan and June Jordan's poetry oh shoot, no. This is embarrassing now. My things. I don't know. There's a lot of revolutionary poetry, but in particular, June Jordan. I think in this moment has really inspired me to move forward.
I was gonna say, damn, Austin, leave some people for us. Like, leave some people that I can mention out here. I was like, okay, Amilcar Cabral's gone now. Ella Baker's gone now. Who else have I got? Nah, I'm just playing. But no, brilliant list. And yeah, those people have been fundamental for me as well. I think historically, who comes to mind is Ghassan Kanafani. And specifically because I think his analysis of Palestinian resistance in the 1930s, in which he identifies the kind of three struggles he feels Palestinians are up against, and that still remains true today, in that it is imperialism, British and US, that it is Zionism, of course, and then also it's reactionism. Reactionism being the collaborators and the normalizers of the Arab states. Zionism, obviously, we know that is, and US imperialism. And I think and also he also brings a class analysis to Palestinian resistance as well, and Palestinian struggle as well, who I think has been fundamental for us in this moment. For me as well, given Pan-African roots, Kwame Ture. Kwame Ture. I think when we look at what Kwame Ture did when he went to Michigan and mobilized and organized with the Arab students there, and how he constantly made the link between Pan-Africanism and anti-Zionism, and even as far from the 60s we find it up until 1992 with the establishment of the worldwide anti-Zionism African Front, which was launched in Libya, right? And I think fundamentally, and why I think it's so important for me, because you know, we get people, and not too, and some people from a good place, some people from an unfortunately reactionary place. What about Congo? And I'm like, well, the same people saying, what about Congo? I never dare at BAP teachings, for example. But that's another day, another conversation. But so when they say things like, what about Congo? I think what has helped me through what Kwame Ture did and other people is that, okay, or even like Sekou Toure as well, is that I have an answer. Okay, yeah, we can center Congo as well, but also, so first and foremost, solidarity isn't transactional, and there's difference between sympathy and solidarity, and even we can have a conversation about anti-Blackness in the Muslim world and the Arab world, and they're all valid conversations. But if you really want to understand why Zionism is the most crystallized form of US imperialism today, and why it impacts Black people on a material level, I find that people like Kwame Ture were instrumental in helping me understand. And contemporarily, I think Dr. Mateo Capasso is an absolute G. I think everyone should read. And also Dr. Bikram Gill from Virginia Tech.
All right, I feel like I will be the least literate comrade on here, but but I will emphasize. I mean, I think some of the people who I have read, who I think, like from a material standpoint, like who can actually inspire you to do the things that we do. I think learning about urban guerrilla tactics is quite crucial. I think that well, of course, like the classics to read are Lenin and Mao Zedong on guerrilla warfare and what the purpose of guerrilla tactics are. I pulled up a couple of the PDFs because I forgot all the authors, but there's a couple. There's one that's the mini manual of the urban guerrilla, which I think is really useful, by Carlos Marighella. I personally found a lot of tactics there to be very interesting, and I drew a lot of inspiration from them. They're, obviously there's certain tactics that are like not very easily adaptable to a university setting. But then there are just, principles and ways of thinking about militant action that can really guide you. I will add maybe one anarchist text if I can. I mean, I'm all for Lenin and I love reading Lenin as well, but I will add just one, which is God and the State. I think that's an important one to read, Mikhail Bakunin. Just because it's a really powerful way of showing you how the state sort of inundates and permeates all the things that you do in your life and attempts to control every single aspect of existence within the state framework. So it's kind of a moment of unlearning. I would say another person who inspires me a lot is Thomas Sankara. There's I think comparatively fewer writings that you can find from him, but one of the ones that I think it was an interview that he did called "We Didn't Import." It was "Import Our Revolution." It's translated from the French, I think. So I don't know if that translation is exactly correct, but "We Didn't Import Our Revolution" is one of them that I think is a really, really good writing or interview from him. Yeah. Beyond that, I think that I agree with a lot of the suggestions that people brought up. What was the one that I think Austin brought up? I forgot the person that you brought up. Sorry, I'm trying to remember who it was. Not Mao Zedong, but
Che.
Yeah, well, no, Che Guevara, of course. I think
Cabral, was it?
Yeah, it was. I forgot exactly which text I was thinking of, but there's plenty of text, and I feel like, again, I am the least probably literate out of the people on the call. There's a lot of anarchist text that I would recommend, but I think that in terms of like practically achieving something, maybe you could stick to the Leninist text in general. There's only one other book that I think I would really, really recommend everybody read, and I actually have it in front of me, which is why I wanted to recommend it. It's The Trinity of Fundamentals. This book it personally was really inspiring. It's fiction-ish technically, but it's inspired very much by real events. I would say that The Trinity of Fundamentals is an excellent book. It was actually something that at the coalition at MIT, we put together this initiative, and it was driven by some of the groups at MIT, like the BGSA and BSU, to like, you know, get people to sort of read this and engage with this kind of you know, dialogue, rhetoric, this kind of struggle, right? To understand what it really means to be in militant struggle, to understand what it really means to be part of it. It's not all fun and games, right? Especially in the protracted struggle. And I really do think that this book, you know, not only emphasizes that, but also emphasizes what principled action looks like.
Well, you all have given us a wealth of things to consider, both in terms of your experiences as student organizers, the type of repression you've experienced, but also to read going forward. So I really want to thank you all. We obviously there's so many more questions and we could continue this conversation, but for the sake of time, we will cut it short today. But I just want to thank all of you all for joining us and having such a rich conversation. I also want to, you know, send our solidarity as you all are navigating your suspensions and are figuring out visas and all those other things. And I also hope, you know, I don't know if you all knew one another before, but I hope that you all are able to connect and whatever work happens over the summer, you know, always tap back in with us. So I just want to say thank you again.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And let us know how we can support in your struggles. Don't ask for no money because I ain't got none, but I'm just kidding. But good luck and thank you all again for being here.
Yes.
Thank you guys for having us on.
Thank you all. No, it's been an honor. A pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, y'all. You're muted, CBS. CBS, you're muted.
I was saying, all right. Sorry, my baby's crying. All right, y'all. We're coming up on 2 hours, so we just wanted to quickly share what it is that we have read this past week, and what are we going to be reading for next week. And then I want to quickly mention a very ominous anniversary that is today. And then Layla has some things she wants to lift up, and then we're going to log off.
So I will just say, in the vein of criticism and self-criticism, I did not finish my reading this week, y'all. So I didn't finish it. So this week I have to do double duty. So I switched from The Source of Self-Regard to this text, Greater Than the Sum of Our Parts, Feminism, Internationalism, and Palestine. And so I'm going to finish this. And also my book for this week is also going to be this Black Power in Palestine. And the reason why is because so for ALD this weekend, I'm responsible for our statement in relationship to African liberation and Palestinian liberation, with a particular focus on women, the role of women. So I have to finish those anyway in order to do my work. But that is my self-criticism for the week. It's just been a crazy week in terms of coordinating for ALD and other things, but those are my reading updates.
All right, y'all. I switched books midstream because part of what I'm reading, or I'm still reading Laundering Black Rage, but it's a book I want to take notes on, and it's not something that I can sit down and read continuously. So about on Friday, I switched to this book, a little thin one, just so I can finish a book, Black Power in Post-Colonial Society by Dwayne Wong. It was actually really interesting. I liked the chapter on Walter Rodney the best, which is the 4th chapter. There's a chapter on religion that's really interesting. And I also read, so he has some particular critiques of Sekou Touré that I wasn't sure about. And so Layla sent me an article, a review of the book from Ajamu Umi that was actually really helpful and clarifying. And so I do recommend it. It's a little short book. There's a chapter on religion, a chapter on, let's see, what is it? On John Lewis and Kwame Ture. I appreciated that chapter too. So basically, he didn't call John Lewis a coon, but basically was like, the people who choose to go into politics are dubious at best. There's a chapter on the WPA and Guyana, which is really interesting. So anyway, I recommend the book. It's a short read, obviously. And then for this week, I'm reading Anthony Lowenstein, The Palestine Laboratory, How Israel Exports the Technology of Occupation Around the World. So this book I picked up from the Lucy Parsons Center. So if you're in the Boston area, go and pick up some books from there. So that's what I'll be reading this week. And drop what y'all are reading in the chat. Let me know if that If you all downloaded the spreadsheet and if that's useful, yeah, let us know. And then,
Okay.
so the ominous anniversary I want to talk about is like today marks 39 years of the MOVE bombing. So the Philly Pigs, under the leadership of a Black mayor, right, Wilson Good, perhaps Philly's first Black mayor, I can't quite remember, but dropped a bomb on the MOVE organization. And so if we think that what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Haiti, what's happening in Congo or Sudan cannot happen here, we need only remember that the U.S. dropped a bomb domestically on a black radical organizations. You can think whatever you want to think about the MOVE organization, but the fact of the matter is, it was the first time in U.S. history that a bomb had been dropped on a domestic organization, and it just goes to show that whatever the global struggles are, Black people, there's always a consternation about Black people. Black people will be on the front lines of being targeted and being cannon fodder. So look, I highly recommend a particular reading called The Mother's Day Massacre by Mumia Abu-Jamal, where he writes extensively about what happened on that day. So yeah, don't forget this anniversary. It's an important one in the struggles for liberation in general.
Yes, it is. And so we had a bunch of updates. We're going to save those for next week just because of time. But the one thing that I did want to just call out is in the vein of the conversation that we had with Momodou, Austin, and Prahlad today, is a continuation of that conversation of students as the spark of revolution. So one of the things that I was following is, so I think somebody in the comments mentioned the middle school walkout today in Berkeley area, but then like there was a faculty encampment that popped up outside of the student encampment, the Rafat Al-Arir faculty encampment. I got an email from the Northeastern alumni is also now. Northeastern alumni has decided that until the university, they have a list of demands to like retract the students' suspensions, but they also are tacking on their demands divestment from Palestine. But they have decided to cut giving to the university, right, in order to support the student encampments. And then there have also been a number of stories about parents who have been coming into sort of consciousness because of their children's student organizing. And I think a lot about the Soweto uprisings and how instrumental the high schools and college students were in getting their own parents, who were, some of whom were domestic workers, mine workers, whatever, involved in anti-apartheid struggles. And then I was just thinking about some of the divestment wins technically. So at this point, I know that Union Theological Board of Trustees has agreed to pull their funding, right? And so I just wanted to bring those to our attention, to think about the ways that these student encampments are having ripple effects in terms of other people's involvement in these anti-Zionist or pro-Palestinian demonstrations. But yeah, so you all hung with us for a good 2 hours. So we are going to wrap it up at that, and also I have to catch a flight back home. So I want to also thank you all for hanging out with us for this long today. I know we went way over our typical time, but most of you all hung around, and we appreciate that as always. Oh, look at that girl. You're muted. We can't hear you.
Yeah, I just said shout out to Sankara, and shout out to dude that mentioned Thomas Sankara, who we named our baby after. Thank you all so much for hanging with us, and we'll read your comments. So keep the comments coming. We'll read all the comments, emails next week, and keep your reading up, and we'll see you then. Thank you.
All right, y'all.
Peace. Bye.